I was part of that weird group that used to fix a tangled VCR tape with a pencil, and now I just touch my front door to unlock it. Developmental psychologists still don't agree on what to call us. If you showed up between late 1976 and 1985, you weren't quite punk rock mixtapes, and you definitely didn't grow up expecting a trophy just for showing up. You were in the in between, the gap nobody really planned for. Around 2014, researchers started saying Xennial because the usual labels just didn't fit anymore. Some sociologists now say this tiny 9 year window isn't just a year range, it's more like a psychological border. And the question is, why does 9 years deserve its own category when everyone else gets 20? Because the ground shifted under your feet at exactly the moment you were trying to find your balance. You weren't old enough to be locked in. You weren't young enough to have Wi Fi wired into your brain from birth. Your first keyboard actually clicked. Your first social network was a dead end street. And right when you started to figure out who you were, the entire planet decided that how information moves, and by extension, how humans connect, was going to be completely rebuilt, not over generations, in 1 decade. I think about what that actually did to my wiring. I remember running home specifically because Nickelodeon was about to air a show I'd waited 7 days for. If I missed it, it was just gone. I couldn't summon it later. I had to sit in that loss. And then my 20s looked completely different. I was exporting MySpace Top 8 drama, refreshing Facebook to see if someone had written on my wall, and suddenly every relationship had a timestamp. Two completely different operating systems for friendship, anxiety, presence installed on the same person. Here's what the data actually says about this. A 2018 paper in Nature Neuroscience tracked prefrontal cortex development and basically confirmed what you probably feel. Your brain's ability to adopt to entirely new rulebooks doesn't shut down at 18. It stays plastic until roughly 25. So you weren't an old dog fumbling with a new trick. You were still in the window where normal was still being defined. 1 decade, you learned to navigate life by memorizing landlines and reading maps folded in your lap. The next decade, you metabolized an operating system that updated itself every week. That's not just adaptation, it's bilingualism. And that fluency created a really specific kind of social intuition. You still know how to arrive somewhere without confirming on WM first. You remember the vulnerability of waiting for a friend at a meeting spot with no way to verify they were coming. That required a different muscle, trust without real time verification. You also remember what it felt like to be completely unreachable, not choosing Do Not Disturb, actually off grid. I think that memory lives somewhere in my nervous system, even if I haven't named it in years. But you're also not threatened by a new CRM tool or a group chat that explodes at 2 a.m. I figured out how to install a router before anyone explained what a router was. I made peace with the fact that my photo albums end at 2004, and then suddenly every mundane Tuesday is archived forever. We exist in both economies, attention rich and attention scattered. Now, layer in the second collision. You didn't just come of age during a tech revolution. I sent out my first resumes directly into the 2008 meat grinder. Economic studies on life stage trauma show this isn't just about having a rough start. People who experience serious financial precarity between 22 and 28 often recalibrate their entire risk thermostat permanently. I still keep emergency cash in places that don't make rational sense later. I smell downturns coming. I struggle to believe stability is permanent because for me, it never was. I learned to pivot because the internet demanded it. I also learned that the rug can be pulled at any second because it was. So here's what you actually are: adaptable, but guarded; digitally native, but not digitally naive. You can do Slack, but you also know how to sit in a waiting room without touching your phone, and that genuinely unnerves younger coworkers. Nobody really hosts this conversation. Mainstream media likes to frame boomers versus millennials. Gen X gets treated as the forgotten middle child. But this micro cohort holds a paradox most people don't even recognize as possible. You remember what it cost to gain all this convenience. I'm not nostalgic for busy signals or encyclopedias, but I also know something essential was lost when the buffer between impulse and response disappeared. I was parented with a long leash. My bike was my freedom pass. I got scraped knees and nobody filmed it. That independence forged a baseline self sufficiency that doesn't require external validation every 6 seconds. Yet, I also arrived at adulthood right as the early web was selling a utopian vision. Connection solves everything, access is liberation, friction is failure. I bought in. And then I watched the same tools that were supposed to set me free start to rewire intimacy, attention, and even loneliness. So I hold two truths simultaneously. Technology is a miracle, and technology is a thief. That's the Xennial signature, not the gadgets you used, the contradiction you learned to carry without it breaking you. You see the before and after, and you refuse to pretend one was purely superior. If this sounds like you, you've probably spent years feeling slightly displaced. Too analog for the digital natives, too digital for the analog purists, not nostalgic enough for Gen X bittersweetness, not optimistic enough for early millennial boosterism. That displacement isn't a personality flaw, it's the residue of crossing a bridge that collapsed behind you. And weirdly, that might be the most useful training nobody talks about. You learned that the environment you were born into doesn't have to be the one you die in. You learned to translate yourself across systems. That's not about being special, it's about being processed through a very narrow slice of history that demanded you become fluent in two incompatible languages. The rest of the world is now catching up to what you've been doing your entire adult life, trying to adapt without disappearing. Everyone is being asked to retool, to unlearn, to hold complexity. You just got a 20-year head start. If this brought something back for you, hit like. It genuinely helps Revayn keep making deep dives like this. And drop a comment. What's one analog skill you're glad you still have? I read them all. Next video is on a different microgeneration that also breaks the usual categories. You won't guess which one. I'll see you in the next one.